So this is the story behind the story of what happened when I was reporting on slavery at Georgetown University and found my family's last name listed among the others enslaved. Yeah, there's a lot here, so get cozy, folks. Back in 2021, I was working on a piece about reparations at colleges and universities and quickly learned about the GU 272.
272 people out of about 1,000 total who had been owned by Georgetown University and the Maryland Jesuits. And those 272 were people who were sold all at once and all together to 3 sugar plantations in Southern Louisiana to rescue Georgetown from bankruptcy.
So that's Richard, and he leads this organization called the Georgetown Memory Project, which works to try and identify descendants of the enslaved at Georgetown. Richard says he usually looks for a few things when trying to identify descendants. So if they're of mixed race background, if they're Catholic, if they have family in Louisiana, and if they have one of the last names listed.
If somebody can check 2, 3, or 4 of those boxes, suddenly you go, bing, this person is almost certainly a descendant of the GU 272.
After I spoke with Richard, I actually went through the document of the GU 272 line by line, reading all the names, and that's when I found Harriet Eaglin. I was shocked to see her name. I was shocked to see my name on this document, but it confirmed my suspicions that there was some relation because there was just too many coincidences of what Richard was telling me about the GU 272 and my own family. This was a complicated moment because as a journalist, we're constantly told to distance ourselves from our stories and that we are not the story, right? We are supposed to elevate voices, highlight issues, hold people accountable. But this was such a glaring fact that I could not ignore or deny and continue to report on this piece. And that was pretty much the scope of the first part of my reporting. I packaged that information up into a few different pieces. I actually won a Gracie Award for that reporting and got connected to so many other family members. But I still had so many questions like, where did Harriet go? Where are her descendants? Am I a descendant of her? How did my family even go from being in documented bondage to current landowners in Louisiana today? I knew I had to go down there and find out. My dad also happened to be there for a work trip, so I tried to include him a bit, and we started our adventure by getting some beignets. So we used to come here every summer. How does it feel to be back?
For me, this is an adventure. When I was your age, I didn't know that much about our family background. So you were helping your father to discover more about, our ancestry.
All right, back to getting some answers. So I was calling, emailing people around, looking for someone doing this research on the ground, and ultimately got connected with Charles Jagno, who's the clerk of court for St. Landry Parish, and Alex Lee, who's the parish archivist.
Spanish influence, French influence, Indians, blacks, Creoles, and free people of color. It was quite a mixture. You had white merchants, you had black merchants, you had white plantation owners, you had black plantation owners.
Everything Charles told me really aligned with some of the stories my dad told me about our family and the area we're from. But my interview with Alex started off with a surprise.
We're actually relatives.
That is unbelievable. How are we related?
We actually related in a multiple ways, so that's why I kind of laughed when I started to go through your request. As soon as I saw the Guillory, I was like, I'm definitely dealing with a relative.
So that Guillory is my grandmother, my dad's mother, and I didn't really get to know her much because she passed away when I was young. Her family's property is completely separate from the Iklin land that we own today. But what Alex shared with me next was pretty tough to hear.
It's reversed to the common narrative that we hear that only whites own slaves. But in your family, well, in our family, the free blacks actually own slaves.
I was completely shocked by this news. I'll speak for myself as a lighter-skinned Black American. It is something that I feared learning about one day, right? Like, no one in my family knows when or how or why our physical traits changed, right? But hearing the verbal confirmation that it's because of this bondage, it is influenced by slavery, this is when it happened, was very intense to hear, but allowed me to think more about my own blackness, what blackness is, and understanding the complicated layers of all that. And then Alex showed me the original land records of the Iklin property.
This is a record dated in 1881 of the origins of that property being passed down to the different heirs. Rosalie Eaglin, which is your ancestor's sister, she sold the land to her mom.
And then that property just got passed down, I guess, in the Iklin line?
Exactly.
I learned so much about my family in that courthouse. No one had any idea that we've had that land for 141 years. And seeing the photos that Alex picked out for me was so healing. When I was growing up, sometimes I didn't feel like I looked exactly like my other family members, but being able to see the relation and similarities was an incredible moment. The next part of my journey led me to Grand Coteau at the Academy of the Sacred Heart. This was a super old Catholic school, but I found out in my research that there were actually Iklins enslaved there. I met up with Caroline, who was a director and historian at Sacred Heart, and asked her if she thought I was connected to Harriet Eaglin in some way.
I think there's undoubtedly a connection between them. I think just the size of the Eaglin family, the connections with Maryland, with Louisiana, I think there most definitely is a relation there.
Caroline then had an incredible surprise for me. She introduced me to Sharon and her mother, who both worked at the academy and also were a part of the Iklin family. So we're all Eaglins. Right. Sharon, our ancestors were enslaved here. How does it feel being on these grounds?
It feels amazing. It's an opportunity most people are not going to be able to get.
I had never seen or looked inside slave quarters, and this building was still being used as storage, but even just being in that area, there was a dark energy there. There was sadness. And Sharon pointed out to me that on the bricks of that building, you can still see the fingerprints from the slaves that made them. After that, we went to a graveyard where there was a memorial to all the families enslaved at the Sacred Heart, and my family's name was on that as well. I was sad at this memorial. It was a lot to think about the type of life that my ancestors lived there, but I also felt this immense amount of pride for knowing how far their sacrifices and lifestyle went, knowing all the accomplishments and amazing things that my family has today. And none of it would have been possible without them. So I wanted to definitely show my respect and gratitude. And it was a very reflective moment.
The names you see here, they are the ones that did live in the slave quarters. You know, as you look around, you see other Eaglins in the graveyard. So they're home.
All right, I know that was a lot, but now that I had these pieces together, I was so eager to share it with my family. So we headed down to the Iklin Farm in St. Landry Parish, where my uncle lives today, and I also got to interview my dad. When you were growing up, did you all ever talk about the history of the land or how we even got the farm?
Occasionally you would hear one of the uncles or aunts that would speak about a couple of the greater uncles or greater aunts as to how they may have ended up here. Unfortunately, I don't remember all of those conversations quite as well.
You know, we were kids. The adults may have had discussions. We were a Creole family. We knew a bit about our roots. Your maternal grandparents only spoke Creole.
Growing up, it was still before the civil rights movement, before integration. How did that impact your life?
I can still remember the separate entrances to places here for whites and blacks. Separate water fountains, went to separate public school systems. Louisiana in general has a nasty history with relation to skin tone. You know, there was this notion that there was a brown bag test, that if your complexion was darker than a brown bag, even though you were African American or at that time considered to be colored or Creole as it were, you were limited in terms of what you could in fact do. And there is no question about it that complexion was taken into account even within our own community, especially within our own community.
Now look, my dad is not a super emotive person by any means, but I was really impressed by how much he was sharing, and it was so special getting to interview him for the first time. Me, on the other hand, I feel like I was a ball of emotions. I had that like pit in your throat the moment I stepped onto the farm. And I think it's because I was still processing everything I learned. and also starting to freak out about the future.
As far as the eye could see, there were rows and rows, acres of sweet potato. The fact that that ranch land has now been turned into homes, it's wonderful. Progress, you can't stop progress, but in some ways I hope that we could literally stop time for a short period of time and maintain what we've had here for so long in the family.
Our farm isn't alone in this new reality. The USDA has shown a steady decline in the number of farms in the country. In 2021, there was just a little over 2 million, down 200,000 from 2007. Aside from these developments, my family still hasn't figured out who's taking care of this land next. Honestly, Dad, one of my fears is that our land could look like that one day. What would it mean to you if we had to say goodbye?
I'm not certain. I probably, I would insist that there be a clause so that there would be located a little obelisk, some kind of notation here with the family name on it. And I see you are tearing up about it, honey. Listen, I know how much great memories you have for this land here. But listen, you and your sister should always feel comfortable that you had the opportunity, and the times that you had with your cousins.
Yeah, it was really fun.
Those memories will never go away. You will have them in your heart.
I honestly did not plan or want to get that emotional during an interview, but I realized I had not been on the property in 5 years, and being there with my dad was a really special moment for me, especially after learning about the history of bondage in our family and finding out that over the last 140 years, we've worked really hard to keep this land. Somewhere deep down inside of me, I have this fear that that could have been the last time I was on the land with it in our family's name, or with my dad on the land in our family's name. So I felt all the feels. It definitely hit me. So the takeaway for me is simply gratitude. I was not expecting to find this much information or be able to go back as far as I did in this research. And I understand that that is an immense privilege. So many other people, especially Black Americans, get stopped in their ancestral search because there just are not existing or preserved documents, right? And I just met so many incredible people who opened their resources to me to help answer some of these questions. And it was just an incredible journey. I am so floored at the reach of this piece. Even still, I'm getting more clues and hints and stories from other cousins I'd never met before. And that has been such an incredible gift. So if you're interested in your own ancestral search, start today. You can go online on some of the databases. You can just ask and record some questions to your family members. And being able to pass that knowledge down is just such a wonderful and beautiful thing you can do for your family, but also future generations. All right, that is the story behind the story. By far the most personal reporting I had ever done. I have no idea where this story will launch me on next, but if there's another adventure, I hope y'all will stay tuned.